Ms. Lopez Rivas, for Renew, Ms. Asiago, and for SND, Mr. Meves. And on my left, I'll have the EP Secretariat. So first of all, allow me to wish you all a very happy and successful new year again. I hope you spend quality time with your loved ones, but now it's time to go back to work because we have a lot on our plates with this directive. So brace yourself for an important journey with 6 meetings ahead of us. And I'm confident, I'm sure that our collaboration will be both productive and respectful. So as every new year should start with good resolutions, I would like to remind you some of essential principles of, so I would call the golden rules of this parliament and this committee. The first one is to respect one another. The debate should always be constructive and align with the rules 10 of the rules of procedures and Annex 2, referring to the code of appropriate behavior for MEPs. So of course we have different opinions and it's supernatural, but the discussion must remain professional and respectful. So that's the first golden rule. And the second one is respect the deadlines. The Secretariat and I are working hard to ensure everything is going smoothly. So for that to happen, it is crucial that deadlines are strictly respected. So please avoid us to have sleepless nights, especially when it comes to amendments. I hope you all received the draft agenda for this meeting. If not, please let me know, the Secretariat, to our email address. Small change to the agenda since Ms. Reimers, the General Director from the Good Lobby, won't be attending. We might have more time at the end, maybe for the Commission to talk again. We'll see about that. So now, according to Article 163 of the Rules of Procedures, we'll proceed to the adoption of the agenda by show of hands. So I will ask who is against the agenda as presented, as you received in the email? No one? Okay. So thank you. The agenda is now adopted. So this session, how is it going to be organized? First, we listen to the European Commission, then to the European Council, and last but not least, we'll have 3 stakeholders. So first, we are pleased to welcome the representative of the European Commission that will present the proposal. So we have 4 of them. So we can see that the Commission has his priorities in order. We are very, very honored to have them all here. So we have Tobias Fluck, Director General for Justice and Consumers, Isabel Gonzalez-Ripa, the Legal Service of the DG for Justice and Consumers, Oksana Baitala, Head of Units of the DG, and Rémi Grimard, Policy Officer. So you have 5 to 7 minutes to present max. So the floor is now yours.
Madam Chair, dear members of Parliament, thank you very much for your invitation on this very pressing issue. The directive we're presenting to you today aims at establishing harmonized requirements on the internal market on transparency of interest representation carried out on behalf of third countries. It equally amends Directive EU 2019-1937, the so-called whistleblowing directive. This proposal is part of a wider framework to which the Commission has attached high relevance, that you can see on the next slide, and that it pursues actively to ensure the resilience of the EU's and its member states' democratic processes. Given the urgency and high political salience of this initiative, I'm happy to share with you that the Commissioner has signaled his willingness to attend a future meeting of this committee if requested to provide further explanations on the broader context of the proposed directive. The proposal is part of the Commission's Defense of Democracy package put forward on the 12th of December 2023 and is in line with the European Democracy Action Plan from 2020. It is an integral cornerstone of this wider action on enhancing the EU's readiness to defend transparency and accountability. With regards to recent events in certain member states and the Union's immediate vicinity, the Commission welcomes your consideration of this proposal and is committed to its rapid adoption. In preparation of this proposed directive, the Commission has conducted extensive consultations and research. Part of this preparatory work to inform the initiative are, amongst others, the Flash Eurobarometer Survey 528, the different analyses of measures taken by third countries and international fora, and open public consultations with stakeholders from member states and third countries between February and April 2023. Those insights confirmed the Commission's evaluation of need for action with regards to enhancing the transparency of lobby activities on behalf of third countries and informed the fully fledged impact assessment accompanying this directive. The impact assessment, please go to the next slide, offers a detailed overview of the current problem situation, existing policy options and their impact, including their effect on enterprises, notably SMEs, social factors, and their position vis-à-vis fundamental rights. The baseline scenario of no action highlights high risks regarding the fragmentation of national regulation in this domain. 15 member states have implemented highly differing measures, including, for example, their disclosure requirements and sanction regimes, whereas 12 member states have adopted no regulatory framework on this issue. For more information on this divergence, please refer to Annex 6 of the impact assessment for this directive. In light of this existing fragmentation that is likely to increase in the near future, significant obstacles to the internal market for interest representation services offered to third countries arise. They result in an uneven playing field for service providers across member states. This means higher compliance costs for cross-border activities on the one hand, and the possibility for forum shopping that potentially circumvents national measures on the other hand. Therefore, the Commission proposes to intervene at Union level on the legal basis of Article 114 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, allowing the Union to adopt measures for the approximation of provisions laid down by law, regulation, or administrative action in member states which have as their object the establishment and functioning of the internal market. With the adoption of this proposed directive, the Commission aims at rectifying the existing uneven playing field of the fragmented regulatory landscape, limiting administrative costs of divergent requirements and registration modalities, and preventing possibilities of circumvention of those national measures. Furthermore, it seeks to improve data and intelligence on interest representation activities on behalf of third countries in the EU. The regulatory framework the Commission is proposing to achieve these objectives is organized in the following structure. I'll give you a brief overview and highlight some of the key provisions on the next slide. Chapter 1 contains the object and purpose that I've just outlined and introduces main definitions. Article 4 sets maximum level of harmonization in the scope of the directive to effectively create the even playing field that I have mentioned before. In Chapter 2, we have included the main obligations for service providers under the scope of this directive to register by disclosing certain information and to keep records of their activities. Member states must establish registers and designate authorities maintaining them. The directive creates a one-stop shop for registered entities with cross-border activities, so authorities responsible for the national register share information with their counterparts in other member states accordingly. Additionally, certain data on the registrants is made public and will be shared in an aggregated annual release by the Commission. However, it is possible to exclude certain data from being published for legitimate interests and overriding principles. In the same perspective, Chapter 5 on supervision and enforcement outlines a sanctions regime that sets certain minimum fines, but strictly excludes criminal sanctions. The chapter equally contains the obligation for member states to establish independent supervisory authorities, to control and develop best practices of the enforcement and advisory group on union level is established. Likewise, the final provisions in Chapter 6 refer to the authorization of the Commission to adopt certain delegated acts on disclosure and publication requirements. Overall, we aim at an agile enforcement to limit administrative burdens, maintain safeguards for fundamental rights, and create harmonized transparency rules for interest representation services on behalf of third countries in the internal market. I am open to questions, equally inviting and future meetings, and look forward to our cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Flack, for a very clear presentation, which I'm sure helped the members of this committee to understand the proposed directive a bit more. So now we are delighted to welcome Blanka Torego, representing the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union.
Madam Chair, honorable members of the European Parliament, it is a profound honor to stand today before all of you at the dawn of Poland's presidency of the Council of the European Union. I extend my deepest gratitude for your invitation, and I address you not only as the representative of my country, but as a committed European devoted to the values that unite us. Poland is and has always been a profoundly pro-European nation. Our history within the European Union is one of hope, resilience, and determination. From the moment we joined this union 2 decades ago, we have embraced its promise, a promise of peace, prosperity, and solidarity. Today, Poland is not just a member of the EU. It starts at the heart of its political and strategic future. We have returned to the central stage of European affairs, ready to shoulder the responsibility of shaping our collective destiny. Our vision is clear: a stronger, more united Europe that defends its principles and stands unwavering against those who seek to undermine them. But let us not be blind around the world that it's around us. This is no ordinary moment in history. We are standing at a crossroads where democracy itself is under siege. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia is not just an attack on a sovereign nation. It is an attack on the very foundations of our European values. Russia's attempt to destabilize democracies, as witnessed in the recent elections in Romania and beyond, serve as a stark reminder that our democratic institutions are not invincible. They must be protected, defended, and strengthened. It is within this critical context that we take up one of the most important tasks of our presidency, ensuring transparency and interest representation on behalf of third countries. This proposal is not just about a legislative framework. It is about safeguarding the integrity of our political systems. Poland is fully committed to building a broad consensus among 27 member states. For this is not a concern of one nation alone, but of Europe as a whole. Our democracy cannot and will not stand or be sold to the highest bidder. Our institutions cannot and will not be manipulated by foreign powers acting in the shadows. Transparency is the light that will keep the darkness at bay. And in this effort, we look at you, the European Parliament. You are the beating heart of the European democracy, the largest parliament in the democratic world. Your voice carries weight, your decisions shape the future, and your role is more crucial now than ever. Poland's presidency will be a presidency of collaboration, and we are eager to work with you to ensure that Europe remains the beacon of democracy, resilience, and hope. Honorable members, history is watching us. The path we choose today will define Europe for generations. Let us stand together, unwavering in our commitment to democracy, resolute in our defense of our shared values. The road ahead might be steep, but together we will make it, with courage, unity, and unbreakable belief in the European project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Torrego, for coming to this meeting and present the presidency view. So now we are pleased to welcome 3 NGOs who will help us understand the views of the civil society on the matter. So allow me to introduce the speakers. So we have Charles Idrissi, representative for European Endowment for Democracy, Leonie Papritz, representative for Open Society Foundations, and Cecilia Longo, Policy and Advocacy Officer for Transparency International. So Charles Idrissi, representative of European Endowment for Democracy, will come first. So they each have 5 to 7 minutes per presentation. So as always, after the presentation, I will open the floor to the members of this committee. So to ensure a fair and efficient process, first, the questions will begin by the shadow rapporteur. Afterwards, other members of this committee may raise their hands to indicate that they want to speak. Someone will come to a mic, so no worries, you just have to stay seated. Please indicate who you're asking the question to, very important. If you can keep it short and sweet, that'll be perfect. And also indicate your name and your political group before talking. Thank you. So now we'll give the floor to Charles Idrissi.
Je vous remercie pour la parole. Donc, honorables membres du Parlement européen, chers collègues et distingués invités, bonjour. Donc, je m'appelle Charles Idrissi, je suis le directeur exécutif de l'European Endowment for Democracy. Je vous suis très reconnaissant, chers députés, de m'avoir invité à cette première réunion de l'IMCO concernant le dossier et donc ce qui témoigne de l'engagement continu du Parlement européen en faveur de l'inclusion démocratique. Donc voilà, donc je vais vous présenter ce que c'est l'EED. Donc d'abord, premièrement, Fondation et mission. Donc, en tant que directeur exécutif de l'IID, je représente une fondation européenne indépendante de droit privé qui a été créée en 2016 à l'initiative de l'Union européenne et de ses États membres, dont l'objectif principal est de promouvoir et soutenir la démocratie, les droits humains et les libertés fondamentales. Nous collaborons étroitement avec les institutions européennes, les gouvernements et les États membres et les partenaires internationaux pour encourager une transition démocratique profonde et durable. Notre action se concentre principalement sur les pays voisins de l'Union européenne, en Europe de l'Est, au Moyen-Orient et en Afrique du Nord. L'IID joue un rôle unique dans la promotion de la démocratie dans les pays voisins de l'UE et au-delà, en soutenant des acteurs locaux engagés dans des processus de démocratisation. Nous intervenons dans des contextes souvent complexes, en fournissant un soutien rapide et flexible à des bénéficiaires tels que les mouvements pro-démocratiques, des journalistes indépendants, des ONG, des activistes pour les droits humains et des jeunes leaders. Ce rôle nous permet d'agir là où d'autres mécanismes de financement ne peuvent pas intervenir, en particulier dans les environnements où les libertés fondamentales sont menacées. Donc, quelles sont les missions et les objectifs de l'IID ? Donc, la mission principale de l'IID, c'est de renforcer la résilience démocratique et de protéger les processus démocratiques, comme je le disais, dans les menaces internes et externes à l'Union européenne. Nos activités sont fondées sur les principes suivants. Donc, premièrement, soutien aux initiatives locales. Nous aidons les acteurs locaux qui défendent des valeurs démocratiques dans un environnement hostile, comme je disais. Deuxièmement, complémentarité. Nous collaborons avec les instruments de l'UE, comme l'instrument européen pour la démocratie et les droits humains. Et troisièmement, flexibilité. Nous adoptons notre soutien aux besoins des bénéficiaires et des contextes locaux, tout en respectant les standards internationaux des droits humains. Donc, en venant ici, il n'est pas inutile de rappeler que la proposition de directive a pour objectif d'harmoniser les règles sur les représentations d'intérêts pour les pays tiers dans le but de protéger l'Union européenne contre les influences étrangères dissimulées. Et donc, si nous venons ici, c'est pour manifester notre soutien à cette directive, parce qu'elle a beaucoup d'aspects positifs. Je vais en donner quelques-uns. Donc d'abord, c'est une réponse au défi des ingérences étrangères. Les ingérences étrangères représentent une menace croissante pour les démocraties européennes. Selon l'Eurobaromètre, c'est 81% des citoyens européens qui perçoivent ces ingérences comme un problème sérieux. Donc c'est fondamental. En introduisant des exigences claires de transparence, la directive garantit que les activités de lobbying financées par les entités étrangères soient ouvertes au public, réduisant ainsi les risques de manipulation dissimulée. Deuxièmement, une harmonisation nécessaire. Donc à ce jour, on a seulement 16 États membres qui disposent de cadres pour réglementer ces activités, et ces cadres varient considérablement. Cette fragmentation, elle crée des incohérences et des lacunes exploitées par certains acteurs. Et donc, en uniformisant les règles dans toute l'UE, la directive facilite la supervision, réduit la charge administrative transfrontalière et protège le marché unique. Et troisièmement, donc on peut avoir un renforcement de la confiance démocratique. Donc les citoyens européens, comme je le disais, sont de plus en plus sceptiques à l'égard des institutions en raison des soupçons d'influence étrangère. La directive favorise la transparence, renforçant ainsi la légitimité et la responsabilité des décideurs politiques. Deuxièmement, nous soutenons la directive, mais nous avons quand même des recommandations. Premièrement, c'est protéger les organisations qui sont pro-démocratiques. Donc le problème aujourd'hui, c'est que c'est les organisations qui sont soutenues par des fonds étrangers, les ONG promouvant les droits humains et la démocratie, elles risquent d'être stigmatisées ou de rencontrer des obstacles bureaucratiques excessifs. Donc ce que nous proposons évidemment, c'est introduire des exemptions spécifiques pour les ONG pro-démocratiques opérant dans des contextes restrictifs. Deuxième point, réduire la charge administrative qui pourrait peser sur les ONG qui soutiennent la démocratie. Donc le problème, encore une fois aujourd'hui, c'est que les petites organisations, souvent à but non lucratif, risquent de subir un fardeau administratif disproportionné. Il s'agit donc de protéger les organisations pro-démocratiques avec objectif d'éviter une réglementation excessive en matière de transparence qui pose le problème de la limitation involontaire des activités normales de la société civile, notamment les ONG qui soutiennent la démocratie et les droits de l'homme, et donc s'assurer que l'exécution de la directive n'a pas d'effet négatif sur les organisations de la société civile qui soutiennent la démocratie. Et donc, ce que nous proposons, c'est mettre en place des seuils minimaux d'activité ou de financement déclenchant les obligations de déclaration permettant aux petites structures de poursuivre leurs activités sans obstacle inutile. Troisièmement, créer une autorité indépendante de supervision. Le problème, c'est que la mise en œuvre de la directive pourrait varier considérablement entre les États membres, compromettant son efficacité. Donc, ce que nous proposons, c'est établir une autorité européenne indépendante pour superviser l'application uniforme de la directive, fournir des lignes directrices claires et garantir une mise en œuvre équitable. Donc évidemment, en venant ici, la directive, c'est quand même, elle comporte des opportunités clés pour l'Union européenne. Elle doit être adoptée pour deux raisons fondamentales. Évidemment, le renforcement de la confiance publique. La transparence accrue permettra de renforcer la confiance des citoyens européens envers leurs institutions, un élément essentiel pour contrer la montée de l'euroscepticisme. Et deuxièmement, inspiration internationale. C'est souvent le cas. En adoptant ces pratiques au contexte européen, la directive peut servir de référence mondiale pour la transparence des représentations d'intérêts. Donc, en venant ici, et ce sera mon dernier point, je vous remercie et je ne manque pas de répéter que je suis ici en représentant de l'EED pour garantir que cette directive atteigne son plein potentiel en équilibrant efficacement les impératifs de transparence et de protection des droits fondamentaux. Mon objectif est de travailler avec vous, les députés européens, pour renforcer la directive tout en veillant à ce qu'elle reste fidèle aux valeurs démocratiques qui sont au cœur du projet européen. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Idrissi. Now, Ms. Papritz, for a representative for Open Society Foundations.
Honorable members of the European Parliament, esteemed colleagues, good morning. I'm Leonie Papritz. I'm here as a Senior Policy Officer and Advocacy Manager representing the Open Society Foundations, and I'm grateful for the invitation of several civil society organizations for this first IMCO meeting concerning the present file, showing the continued commitment of the European Parliament for democratic inclusion. Today, I share the perspective of the Open Society Foundations on this proposal, and which has significant implications for the diversity of civil society actors and the European vision on transparency and interest representation, and thus overall democracy. To introduce the Open Society Foundations briefly, to have you understand better where we are coming from, we are the world's largest private funder of independent groups, NGOs, and CSOs working for fundamental rights, equity, justice, and democracy. We support a large spectrum of independent voices and organizations all across the world who are determined to foster democratic values and inclusive societies. Our work is based on a network guided by local and global expertise. And our work and activities include grant giving, research, advocacy, etc., to ensure that civil society can build the future they want to live in. And in Europe, in particular, for example, that is supporting independent journalists in Ukraine, strengthening Europe's global role, supporting the Western Balkans in their efforts to move closer to the EU, and targeting rising economic inequalities across the continent. And in Brussels, we are committed to ensuring that these values are incorporated in EU policymaking. And this is why we are particularly concerned about the Commission's proposal on interest representation on behalf of third countries. Overall, we support the objective and the defense of democracy package because strengthening democracy is one of the most crucial pursuits in the decade of the 2020s. Accountability and transparency standards are a central element of trust and confidence in the democratic system. The better regulation guidelines are targeted to ensure that legislation benefits civil society by improving their involvement and taking impact assessment more seriously. However, what we see so far does not live up to these standards. Despite the extensive consultations, including stakeholders, the Commission has produced a vague, unclear proposal that leaves room to more questions than answers, and that poses a tremendous risk to dynamic, lively civil society landscape in Europe, if not addressed properly. This directive has the potential to restrict our cooperation with civil society organizations instead of advancing them. So our main points of criticism are, for example, the obligation for legal representation could complicate the work of smaller NGOs, including the ones we support, and the definitions are too broad, leading to a lot of insecurities. Do the NGOs and CSOs we support on behalf of the Open Society Foundations fall under the scope of the directive? These are ambiguities and questions that show how the directive might even lead to a shrinking of civic space, stigmatization, and even more challenging conditions for civil society than ever before. And civil society is, I remind you, the backbone of democracy and democratic policymaking. We, as the Open Society Foundations, are on your side, and we work for your goals of resilient democracies too. Why put obstacles in our way? Why endanger the freedom of association, and why hinder the engagement of global actors with honest, transparent interests in the European democracy by adding unnecessary burdens? And our goal is not just to advance European, but also global justice, a dedicated objective of the EU as well, by connecting the global south with political leaders in Brussels. But how does that work under these rules? We are no foreign interference, we are allies, and please show us that you see us as allies too. So, in the next steps, please consider the implications of this directive carefully. As we see it now, the stated aims of greater transparency of interest representation services will not be achieved, but rather have detrimental effects on civil society organizations. Therefore, we call the co-legislators to reassess the current approach of the directive and consider other approaches that could be more appropriate. Please be careful that even with several amendments, this text might not be able to reach the objective. To start with, we urge you to tighten the definitions, clarify the scope, consider financial threshold for the duties required by the directive, for example, excluding small amounts of money, and ensure that obligations and responsibilities are proportionate and realistic for all. We are happily at your disposal for further discussion. So please contact me as well as my colleagues if you care about making civil society voices heard, striving for a Europe ever more democratic and inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. The last presentation for the NGO will be Cecilia Longo. She's a Policy and Advocacy Officer for Transparency International.
Dear members of the IMCO meeting, honorable members of the parliament, thank you for having me. I'm Cecilia Longo, I'm Advocacy and Policy Officer at Transparency International. And today I would like to address with you some of the issues that my organization as Transparency International has found concerning the proposal for this specific directive. I kindly ask you to switch slide. So as you can see, my presentation will be structured in this way. First of all, I will provide you some background, especially about my organization. Then I will go on delving into the criticalities of the current proposal. Then I will expose which are the main recommendations that Transparency International advances for this proposal. And then to conclude, I will highlight the relevance of these changes, and I will further terminate with a call for action. Can you switch aside? Okay, so first of all, Transparency International is an organization committed to fight corruption and to enhance and increase transparency at the level of governance and ensure good governance all over the world. So coming to this directive, as you know, this is part of a package proposed by the Commission, which is called Defense and Democracy Package, presented in December 2023. We, as Transparency International, we support the overall objective of both the package and the proposal. Nevertheless, we are deeply concerned with the fact that the current proposal might risk of falling short of its goals, especially our key concerns regards the fact that this proposal may be too similar to the so-called foreign agent laws, which the EU has previously criticized, especially because these laws entails risk in terms of stigmatization, disproportionate restriction of freedoms, but also they have negative impact of harmonization in terms of EU governance. Therefore, our key recommendation, as you will see in a second, is to enlarge the scope of the proposal to cover all interest representation activities. Well, so coming to the criticalities that we found, going into details, you will see the criticalities in this slide and in the next one. And first of all, we would like to highlight the fact that the scope of the proposal is way too narrow, but also at the same time is unclear. First of all, for example, at Article 2, we found that the definitions found lack specificity, therefore they are at risk of weaponization. But also, at the same time, paradoxically enough, the directive does not cover all the activities related to a malign influence aimed at influencing the democratic exercise in the European Union. Therefore, and I come to the second criticality, we found that the directive is widely ineffective because of its loopholes. Especially, it's also critical in terms of harmonization. First of all, because it does not tackle the differences yielding from the fact that 14 member states already has in place laws regarding registration requirements for lobbying. Therefore, it may be adopts with its particular objectives because it may even strengthen and enhance fragmentation. Moreover, the legal base, as found in the case that you cannot see on the slide, but you should be able to see in the slide, so Commission versus Council of 1999, basically, in this case, the ECG found that the legal base might not be even appropriate for this particular scope. Which slide? Coming to the other criticalities that we found, as my colleagues has already widely stressed, we found that there are fundamental rights violations, especially in terms of Article 7, 8, and 12 of the Charter. And also, as highlighted by the court in the so-called Hungary case, these provisions similar to this one might be at risk of being discriminatory and disproportionate. Also, and this is the main criticality of the whole proposal, we found that there is a lack of clarity in terms of how national authority should manage the register and in the way in which their powers are framed, both in terms of a lack of clear framing of their independence, but also in terms of a lack of effective remedies to counterbalance the wide powers conferred to these authorities. Lastly, in terms of global implication, we found that the directive could have negative impacts, especially because the EU has previously criticized similar measures in Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and therefore it may be at risk of undermining the EU moral standing, especially in terms of democratic commitments. Lastly, such proposal may be at risk of legitimizing restrictive practices worldwide. Therefore, we at Transparency International, again, committed to a fight against corruption and to enhance transparency, we propose 3 main recommendations to ameliorate the directive in order to enable the directive to achieve its objectives. First of all, we propose to expand the scope to all entities providing interrepresentation services in the EU, regardless of legal status, funding type, source of funding, and also place of establishment. Therefore, and this is the second recommendation, we suggest an holistic approach capable of taking both internal and external funding, but also capable of providing horizontal harmonization. Lastly, and this is the most technical but also the most important one for us, it's extremely relevant to revise the part regarding management of national authorities, because we feel that the proposal need to see the introduction of measures regarding sanctions for stigmatization carried out by national authorities, and therefore the introduction of effective remedies. And also it is crucial to ensure the independence of all authorities involved, not just the supervisory one, but also the ones that are in charge of managing the register, because at Article 15.6, this is not, like, independence of these authorities is not provided for. So just to summarize, these changes are relevant especially in terms of four things. First of all, they reduce possible circumvention of the proposal. Second of all, they are in place. They should be in place to strengthen democracy. Also, they enable to better protect civil society actors. And lastly, they enhance EU integrity. So I conclude by stressing the fact that Transparency International, committed to the fight against corruption, shares the overall objectives of both the proposal and the directive, nevertheless takes issues with the way in which the directive is framed. Therefore, it really suggests expanding the scope in order to arrive to a sort of more overall comprehensive, overarching interest representative act. And therefore, I conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and underline that we are more than willing to cooperate and because together we really can make EU more democratic. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your valuable insight. We are very, very happy to have the NGOs here today, as it's really important to this committee to hear the civil society voice. Also, the presentation will be sent to you after the meeting. So now moving on to the questions. So then again, I just want to stress that you have to name the person you're asking the question to, and also mention your name and your political party, please. So starting with the rapporteur for EPP, Ms. Einchen-Bleichner.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank all the NGOs for coming today and presenting their positions and their suggestions for this file. My questions would be for Ms. Papritz from the OSF. One of your suggestions was the clarification of the scope of the directive. Could you maybe go more into detail on your suggestions?
Thank you. Now for SND, Ms. Lopez Iglesias.
Hello, thank you very much. My question will go for Mr. Idrissi from European Endowment for Democracy. And because he talked about establishing certain exemptions or different treatment depending on the type of entity, and especially to pro-democratic NGOs, I would like to ask you if you could develop a little bit more in this, and if these type of differentiations are established, do you have any specific proposal on how could we ensure that this flexibility is not used by entities seeking to circumvent the directive? Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the Patriots for Europe, Mr. Mochard Dumont.
Merci beaucoup. Notre président, Jordan Bardella, a écrit un ouvrage décisif récemment. Il l'a appelé « Ce que je cherche ». Il a écrit un ouvrage qui évoque le futur glorieux de la France avec le Rassemblement national à sa tête, un futur sans déclassement, sans grand remplacement, sans délaissement de nos territoires. Eh bien, cet ouvrage décisif, Ce que je cherche, il nous a fait penser à quelque chose avec les patriotes. Ce que nous cherchons ici, c'est comment la Commission a osé sortir un texte avec une base légale si offensante, incohérente et totalement inefficace. Donc, ma question... Merci beaucoup. Je ne sais pas qui c'est, mais merci beaucoup. Donc, ma question... Je ne connais pas cette personne. Ma question est du coup pour l'OSF. Est-ce que vous pensez que la base légale devrait être changée? Et si oui, pour laquelle? Et pensez-vous qu'elle doit être liée à la souveraineté nationale de nos nations?
Thank you. Now if the NGOs will reply, maybe we can do 3 questions, then the answers.
Thank you for the questions. First, regarding clarifying the scope, we have an initial assessment on the file, and we're particularly concerned because the scope is so broad and vague that right now we don't even know who is included in being an interest representation provider. For example, we strongly oppose the inclusion of civil society, civil dialogue mechanisms. And if we have a more defined scope, we can only even start negotiating and talking about who is part of this and if this makes sense to regulate. But right now, it could be anything or anyone, which is why this is like an important starting point. And regarding the, what was it, the legal basis, we have concerns for the legal basis, but this is more related to the fundamental rights to privacy, to the protection of personal data, and to the freedom of association. So I don't know if we are in line there, but this is all I'm saying right now. We are currently working on more details and a more detailed approach to this on behalf of OSF. So yeah, we remain available for further consultation in the future and to discuss more details to this.
Maybe if the other, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I'm going to speak in French, sorry. Merci pour la question sur les obstacles administratifs et notamment sur les possibilités d'introduire des exemptions sur les ONG pro-démocratiques. Je vais donner deux exemples. La première chose, c'est qu'on peut avoir des exemptions qui sont basées sur la nature des activités. Comme je disais tout à l'heure dans le discours, c'est des exemptions sur les activités pro-démocratiques et sur les droits humains. Voilà, par exemple, on peut prendre l'exemple d'ONG qui travaillent sur des programmes de formation électorale ou de renforcement des médias, par exemple, des médias indépendants aux frontières européennes. Et voilà, ça peut être aussi des ONG qui se concentrent en fait sur des projets qui peuvent être éducatifs ou culturels. Il y a aussi un deuxième type d'exemption, peut-être des exemptions sur le plan fiscal, parce que je parlais dans mon discours de taille, on va dire, et de financement d'ONG. J'ai pas encore actuellement le montant sur lequel on pourrait exempter certaines ONG, mais voilà, ça peut être, on peut en discuter. Et puis, je pense que le financement des ONG, c'est un bon exemple pour fixer un taux d'exemption.
Thank you very much for the question. I would just shortly add something on the scope, because I thought it was interest on the matter. So basically, as I would take the same position as my colleagues, stating that the scope is at the same time paradoxically enough too vague, but not overarching enough, especially because from the definition proposed in Article 2, interest representation services are defined according to Article 57 of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, and basically making everything falling under the scope of this definition, but at the same time, as provided by Article 3.a of the directive, they are basically ruling out most of the interest representation activities that are not carried out which are limited according to funding type and source of funding. Therefore, it's at the same time too vague and paradoxical, because to some extent we want to cover all services, but we're cutting out some others. So this should be something that should be addressed. And so basically that was about the scope. If there are other further questions, we're more than willing to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you for your answers. Then moving on to ECR with Mr. Renaud de Souza.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Mr. Idrissi from the EED. So you mentioned that this directive could be an international example of such type of laws. However, your organization has in the past advocated against such laws, notably in Georgia, saying and arguing that this would go against the rule of law as per the definition of the Council of Europe. So are you then implying that this directive here is going against the rule of law? And assuming that not, what should be changed for it not to be?
Thank you. Now for the Greens. For Renew, Ms. Wen.
Merci beaucoup. Je tiens à remercier les intervenants pour leur excellente contribution. My question is for Charles. You spoke about the harmonization, that you feel that this is necessary between the member states to have equal levels. But at the moment, we have some member states that have much higher levels of provisions than that which is being proposed. For example, my own country of France, but also I'm aware of Slovenia and Ireland. Would you agree that it would be better to raise standards to meet that of the highest states, to the highest possible level, rather than lower them to the lowest common denominator? Merci.
Thank you. Now for the Greens, Mr. Menet. And can you also mention the country you're from when you're asking a question? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm François Menet from Germany for the Greens. So thank you for organizing this meeting and giving us a chance to hear from the civil society organizations who are the very core of the proposed directive and whom we thank for their very insightful presentation. My question will be for Cecilia Longo from Transparency International. You raised many criticisms and we share your concerns on most of them. But if you had to rank them in order to identify clear red lines to you, what will this be? For examples, are there some provisions in the current text that will make it more harmful than useful, in your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if we can give the mic to the NGOs for the answers.
Ma réponse sera très simple, c'est que j'ai pas bien compris la première question, donc il faudrait la répéter, s'il vous plaît.
Can you repeat the question, please, Miss Wen, for Renew?
Pas problem. Basically, some countries, such as France, have a much higher level of standards for transparency for third country interest representation already. We noticed that you emphasized that there needs to be harmonization between the member states, but what is being proposed is much lower. So would you support the levels being elevated to that of the best examples, such as France, or are you happy with the current proposal as it stands?
Oui, je soutiens toujours l'idée d'une harmonisation, et effectivement, l'exemple de la France, c'est un bon exemple, comme vous l'avez dit. Donc effectivement, ce sera une question qu'on pourra développer ensemble, mais oui, bien sûr, à mon avis, l'harmonisation, à mon avis, c'est une bonne solution pour résoudre tous les problèmes en matière de transparence.
Thank you very much for the question. Well, regarding if there are some specific provisions that might be overall negative and have a negative impact, I would say that the main concerns, and I will summarize 3 of them, are the fact that because of the already existing 14 different national laws on different registration requirements in terms of lobbying activities, the problem is that this directive, in the way it is framed, it will try to achieve harmonization, but at the same time, it will provide in practice for the fragmentation in terms of overlapping, and also because it does not tackle the problem of existing diverging national laws. At the same time, the other negative impact that we'll have, it is especially in terms of impact of civil society burden, because small NGOs will be, of course, will be impacted more because in terms of administrative burden. And lastly, and this is the most concerning one for us, it regards Article 15 of the directive, especially because it does not fully provide an account for full independence of all national authorities involved. And this could be extremely problematic when it comes to national authorities of member states with an undermining and crumbling rule of law. We are deeply concerned about that part. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the left. Questions, Ms. Snaka? Yeah.
Thank you for everyone's presentations. I think that was very insightful. My question is, representing France. My question is for Ms. Longo. We have seen some very concerning trends in recent years concerning democracy globally, but also particularly in Europe. Do you foresee the possibility of member states interpreting or implementing directive in ways that disproportionately target civil society groups that could be critical to their governments? And how might the directive requirements be abused to delegitimize these CSOs, particularly in states with shrinking civic spaces? Could you please expand on this?
Thank you. And the last question will be for ESN, if they have a question. No? Okay, so then for the NGOs, if you might answer the question of Ms. Naka. Yeah, thank you.
Again, thank you very much for the question, especially because it links to the last point that I've previously underlined. So basically, the real problem with the fact that the part of the that basically provides for the powers of national authorities. That part is not framed in a way that can have a positive effect, especially because it does not tackle the risk that might arise in terms of stigmatization carried out by national authorities in an intentional way. Something that we have already underlined in previous position papers that are publicly available. It's the fact that the malignant actors, so basically actors that want to undermine the democratic process, do not play by the rules of the game. So just imposing further rules does not make any particular change, but just imposes some obstacles for actors to overcome. And that's the reason why we should be addressing the loopholes in the directive. And this part is particularly problematic because in states where we have seen undermining rule of law, so basically a rule of law that is crumbling, civil society actors might be targeted, but also they do not have effective remedies to counterbalance that powers that are conferred by the directive. So these are our concerns in that part. Thank you.
Thank you for all the rapporteur and the shadows for your questions. Now I'm opening the floor to all MEPs. So by show of hands, yeah, if we can give the floor to the ESN. No, it's not ESN. SCR, sorry.
Madame la Présidente, mes chers députés, ma question s'adresse à Monsieur Idrissi.
If you can please state your name, country, and group. Thank you.
Romania, ECR. Donc je voulais savoir comment vous vous sentez légitime d'avoir votre mot à dire aujourd'hui. Représentez-vous le peuple? Je trouve ça très bas de votre part que vous sous-entendez que nous ne fassions pas notre travail correctement. Je vous retourne la question. Donc, vous avez reçu 12 millions de la part de la Commission européenne en 2015. Mais qu'est-ce que vous avez fait concrètement, Monsieur Idrissi? Je ne vous ai pas vu toquer à la porte des Roumains. Expliquez-moi ça. Là, il y a un quiproquo, monsieur.
Thank you. Another question? Yes, for SND here.
Buongiorno a tutti. Parlo solo inglese. Madam Chair, dear colleagues, my name is Kasper Kochumbas. I represent the SND from Italy. And to use this opportunity, I wish to thank the European Commission for preparing the draft. To a certain extent, I share the view of those who spoke before me on the level of clarity of the proposal, but at the same time, I think it's our duty to the citizens to make this draft proposal less unclear and more clear. I wish to say that we prepare legislation not only for the good weather, but also for the bad weather. So I hope that the result of the legislation will be an umbrella that will help us to protect ourselves from shadows and shady practices. I wish to remind my dear colleagues that here we are supposed to work for the citizens, not for the benefit of big organizations or those who lobby for the benefit of third countries. So for the benefit of the citizens, I will say that in the proposal there are certain elements that put more pressure on the national administrations and less on the private bodies, especially in the Article 11. We have the obligation for the private entities to report within 10 working days. And yes, I will. And for the public administration for 5 days. I think this approach is uneven and we should have a more balanced approach for public administrations. And lastly, I pose a question to those who wish to respond on behalf of the stakeholders. If you have the necessary resources to have an office in Brussels, is the obligation to have a legal representative really a burden to you? Thank you.
Thank you. Then again, don't forget that it's a public hearing. So we're here to ask questions. The comments from MEPs could be are going to be done next week. On Wednesday. Thank you. Can the NGOs would like to answer to the questions? Yes.
I am responding to the question of Mr. Kochumbas. Thank you. As I presented Open Society Foundations, we support NGOs and CSOs in Europe. So we do have a small office for European policy in Brussels, but we try to foster democratic and democratic inclusion in political debates and a stronger civil society in Europe by supporting NGOs and CSOs that do individual work. So the proposal would target them directly, and it does have nothing to do with the work we do.
Do you want to answer? Yes.
Je vous remercie, monsieur le député, pour la première question sur le fait que l'EAD n'aide pas en réalité le peuple européen. Je vais vous répondre sur la Roumanie, parce qu'en réalité, si. L'EAD a agi. En réalité, on a concentré nos efforts justement sur les initiatives qui renforcent la résilience démocratique face aux menaces. C'est très compliqué en pratique de bien agir, mais voilà, on a créé des partenariats stratégiques parce qu'on a collaboré avec des organisations locales. Et je vais vous répondre quand même sur l'argent. C'est pour ça qu'on utilise cet argent aussi. C'est pour à la fois aider les pays comme la Roumanie, mais aussi les pays externes, justement. On aide aussi l'Union européenne sur les menaces externes qui ont des influences sur les pays internes à l'Union européenne. Voilà, des campagnes de sensibilisation, des soutiens aussi aux médias, justement, qui sont pro-démocratie, pro-européens. Voilà, donc c'est toutes sortes d'activités que nous avons menées et que je ne vous laisserai pas dire que nous n'avons rien fait. Je vous remercie.
Do we have other questions for MEP? Yeah. For the left, please.
Thank you so much. Benjamin Passo for the left, Sweden. My question is for Cecilia Longo. According to your position at Transparency International and also your previous experience on social rights, social policy and gender equality, to what extent this new register represents a danger for minorities, especially for LGBTQ+ community in countries where they're already oppressed? Thank you.
Another question, maybe? Do we have, for one member from EPP? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Veronica Juhas. I'm here from the EPP party from Croatia. And my question is for the European Endowment for Democracy. So you mentioned that there would be a list of pro-democracy NGOs with exemptions. My question is, who would determine who gets such a status, and how could this be prevented from becoming too politicized? Because, for instance, we can see in countries like Hungary that this tool is already being used to block actually pro-democratic NGOs from, like, this can be turned around easily. So just who would be in charge of such status? Thank you.
Thank you. One question from PCF, yes, and then we can hear Mr. Crooks, and then we can move on to another round of answers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Samuel Crooks, Patriots for Europe MEP from Austria, and I'm a proud Austrian. Dear colleagues, dear experts, I wish to wholeheartedly thank you for taking the time to come and share your valuable insights with us this morning. I would also like to thank you for the opportunity to have a constructive debate this morning on the important issue facing us. But I simply cannot thank anyone here for a constructive debate this morning because there has been no debate. Today is a public hearing. Of course we must hear expert advice. Of course we must be informed and time is short. But that no official time between MEPs to discuss this and to debate it was scheduled today is a disgrace and shows that once again unelected officials take precedence over the European citizen and their democratically elected representatives. Europe must be given a chance to speak and not just a chance to be spoken to. Nevertheless, I do have a question. I have received letters and emails from citizens and constituents in my own home country, Austria, who are concerned about the possible stigmatizing effects of the directive's provisions. Their question, which I will pose to Ms. Longo of Transparency International, is whether the civil society organizations present here today are reassured that the current provisions of this directive will not threaten their ability to operate in the European Union and will not damage EU relations with third countries like our friends in the United States of America.
Thank you. Now for the answers.
Thank you very much. I will start with a question about minorities. Well, it is our concern that minorities can be further stigmatized by the provisions of this directive, especially, as I said before, in countries that are not performing well in terms of democratic performance, but also in terms of rule of law. It can indeed be a further stigmatization on them. Also, I would like to introduce the idea of minorities being stigmatized from an intersectional perspective, because when it comes to NGOs carried out and civil society organizations carried out by minorities, which aims at connecting and enabling global South actors to advance their interest in the EU, then it can come to double stigmatization effect, because these civil society organization carried out by minorities could be, first of all, stigmatized for being a minority, but second of all, stigmatized because they wanna advance the interest of less powerful actors in the global south. So there can even be a risk of this double stigmatization. That's my answer to this question. Instead, for the other question that I received, well, I want to indeed state again that we are concerned with the stigmatization effects, and therefore we are concerned with the possibility that civil society actors might have, especially small organizations and small entities, to be able to carry out their activities. So that's the reason why we advocated for some changes in the directive. Thank you.
Je voudrais répondre à votre question justement sur les prochaines étapes sur les questions d'enregistrement. Tout à l'heure, j'ai évoqué deux idées et une principale, en fait, sur les exemptions basées sur les financements pour les ONG. Et à mon avis, c'est peut-être plutôt cette exemption qui paraîtrait la plus intéressante et la plus réaliste. Mais il faudrait encore fixer aujourd'hui un montant spécifique et un montant dont on pourrait discuter pour exempter ces ONG avec un budget assez faible, finalement, qui aurait un impact plus limité, et donc on pourrait les exempter d'obligations d'enregistrement. Et ça leur permettrait d'agir et de réagir. Et donc, pour moi, c'est ça le step suivant.
Thank you. And I just wanted to reassure Mr. Crooks, I mean, you mentioned it already in your question, but I'm reassuring again, that today is a public hearing, and next, on Wednesday, will be a debate. So there you go, you'll be able to debate. No worries. Do we have other questions? For SND, Mr. Lukatis?
Hello, my name is Lias Lukaitis. I'm coming from Germany. I have a question to the representative of Open Society Organization, but I want to hear the view of the other as well. So a key challenge when we discuss interest representation lies in addressing third country funding in a way that balances transparency with respect for the independence of civil society. In this context, I would like to ask the following. How can we ensure transparency while safeguarding the independence of NGOs and civil society organizations when third countries provide core funding that may indirectly or unintentionally influence their activities? Do you believe that the directive should address situations where a third country funding is intended to support lobbying or advocacy efforts? Thank you.
Do we have another question? For EPP, Ms. Yusola.
Thank you, Madam President. And first, I want to thank all the NGOs present here today. Your message and concerns have been heard. My question is more to the Commission. Many thanks for your presence also. According to the directive, it is the member states that shall set up the supervisory authorities, ensure their sufficient financing and independence. We all know that certain EU countries have issues with the rule of law, and I would not completely trust in their ability to comply with this directive. How will the Commission act if a member state does not comply with the directive? What are you prepared to do? For example, my country, Greece, has worked hard to set up a transparency register for lobbying, and it would not be in the interest of Greek citizens nor Greek companies that we continue to have this very fragmented market where lobbyists based in member states with rule of law issues can continue to play with different rules. Thank you very much.
Reminder that the question for the Commission will be on Wednesday. So I don't know if you had a question for the stakeholders. Yes, for the Vice Chair, please, a question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the representatives that are here with us today. I'm a representative from EPP Germany, and my question was for Mr. Popritz, representing the Open Society Foundations, especially since your terms relating the funding seem to be opposing the ones as explained by Mrs. Longo from Transparency International. You propose excluding small amounts of money to protect smaller organizations, whereas Mrs. Longo proposes including all types of funding. Right now, as it is, the literal interpretation of the recital 27 would mean that a CSO that receives funding to run a project base needs to register, but a CSO that receives funding to run an office does not. How can we make sure that this doesn't benefit overly left-wing green-front organizations, such as has happened in Germany with the new lobby register, and doesn't impact negatively small and medium-sized enterprise that we in APP are committed to support? Thank you very much.
Yeah, do you want to answer?
Thank you for the questions. First question, how to ensure transparency when third countries promote the funding or contribute to the funding. Wait, 1 second. So the NGOs and CSOs we support, they work completely independent of us, and we just supervise or we give funding to those organizations who we think are doing a valuable and independent job, just how they think is how their future, how they envision their future. So we don't interfere with anything they do, and this is how we ensure that there's no interest representation that is influenced in any way how the Open Society Foundations think, but we want to foster a rich landscape of civil society organizations, and yeah, that's our stance on this. So we don't think there's any particular problem with in terms of transparency, but of course we support transparency, for example, through registers. And the second question, wait, I forgot. Oh no, I remember. So we are not here to do your job, but we just can support the standpoint that we have, and we don't see any problem in that there's any benefits for left or green organizations over other organizations. This is not about political orientation or any like political party lines. This is a general file and a general proposal, and this is, of course, if it benefits certain party lines or certain positions in the civil society landscape, it must be the same for everyone and not just for one party line. But this is nothing we see as that is a problem here.
Thank you. I think there was a question for the Greens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Anne Dever. I'm representing the Greens from the Netherlands. Many thanks to the organisations who've come here today to provide such expert advice. As everybody knows, the the Greens are long defenders of increasing transparency of lobbying activities, and we support the goal of the proposal regarding third country interventions. However, we are mindful of the risks that we've heard today from the organisations. In particular, I wanted to ask about the fragmentation that we heard, what we could see in the implementation of the current proposal, given the diversity of member state national laws on this topic. So I'm interested in how all three organisations view the tension between ensuring full harmonisation, but allowing certain member states to adopt more ambitious transparency measures. And in particular, would they consider that a tiered approach to compliance tailored to the size and type of the organisation to be a viable compromise?
There was a question for Mr. Romero for Patriots.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Simon Romero, Patriots from Euro-Hungarian MEP. I had a first question for you, Chair. I thought we agreed upon a draft agenda that included the European Commission presentation. I think that we just heard from the Director General, and so I was wondering why also on a procedural note, the legal service, the head of unit, and the policy officer didn't take the floor. Since you're carrying out your job so precisely as you underlined to my esteemed Austrian colleague about the debate of the next session, I'll try to do my one as well at the same note. And then I was just thinking about that Hungary has been particularly targeted by the Open Society Foundation's agenda. Soros himself had declared his disdain for conservative governments that stand for national sovereignty and cultural identities preservation, including our own. His socialist-inspired vision seeks to impose a clear one-size-fits-all model on Europe, undermining the willing of ordinary citizens in favor of unelected NGOs and activists should have with little accountability. Before than imposing regulatory burdens on member states, I think that we should have a closer look to what happens in this hemicycle. We don't hear today from more right-leaning NGOs, and that would have been really important in terms of transparency and democracy, the values we all stand for here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Just before giving the floor to ESN for a question, I'll just answer your question. So it was a demand for the Commission. It was a last-minute decision from them to actually have only one speaker. And according to Article 164 of the Rules of Procedure, I'm allowed to take the decision to allow them to have only one speaker instead of four. Thank you. So now ESN, if you have the question.
Hello, I am Natasha Mardinian, MEP for ESN, and here to represent my fatherland, Germany. It is clear that this directive introduces an unnecessary burden whose sole purpose is to discourage democratic participation. Can the representative for Open Societies please explain how they will call on co-legislators to amend the text and tackle this restriction on freedom of association so that the text does not disproportionately affect smaller parties? You say that you support registers, but which unnecessary and burdensome reporting provisions will be addressed?
If the NGOs would like to answer. Ms. Long.
I still have to answer a question about fragmentation. I remember it was coming from the left, if I'm not mistaken. So basically, there was a question regarding the risk of fragmentation and how we can achieve harmonization at the same time ensuring that member state can enact higher standards. So, well, in our analysis, we've found that the main concern will first of all be fragmentation, because the directive, paradoxically enough, even if it tackles, it aims at achieving harmonization, it does not tackle existing situations, so it does not actually harmonize, but it indeed paradoxically increases fragmentation. So that would be the first problem. And the problems with implementing higher standard will come just in a second moment after we have first of all, tackled and achieved a real harmonization. Because how can we, the problem of having some member states implementing higher standards, it means that there's a standard and something should be higher. But if we don't even have a standard, it's very difficult to ensure that something can be even higher. Then in these regards, even if this directive is not suited to achieve the standard, we can say that the specific, the form of the legal proposal, so the directive is the right one, because it will eventually, if the text is changed and we can achieve a level of harmonization, then other and higher standard can be established. So that would be my answer to this question. Thank you.
So we particularly care when it comes to the administrative burdens. We particularly care about, for example, preventing the duplication of registry efforts and legal and practical ambiguities and clarities of the text. And we mainly care about that civil society organizations and NGOs can do an effective job without being worried all the time about finding legal representation or, for example, the liability of legal representation. So this would just add burdens to their job and would prevent them from doing an effective job, especially when they already face hostile conditions in democracies and even ever more restrictions of their work in various countries of Europe. And this is what we're here for. And
I think we had a question from S&D. Yeah, Mr. Garcia.
Guten Morgen, Carlos Garcia, a social democrat. I am also a proud Austrian and a European citizen, because there is no contradiction among the two, as I would like to remind my colleague. And I have a question for Ms. Longo from Transparency International on the issue of the management of national authorities, because you talked on the need to introduce sanctions for stigmatization by national authorities, but at the same time to guarantee the independence of all national authorities. I see some sort of contradiction here, and I would like you to clarify if you would be in favor of a more European level control of the national supervision authorities, or on the contrary, to leave them totally independent. Thank you.
Do we have a question? Another one? Do we give ECR?
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Honorable Deputies, and Honorable Stakeholders. Thank you all for being here. I have a question for Ms. Longo of Transparency International. She mentioned that it might be a good idea to have an independent, maybe possibly European level authority supervising the setup of new transparency registers. But does the Honorable representative think that this is such a good idea, seeing that European level institutions are being challenged increasingly day by day and their legitimacy is being called into question? Thank you.
For EPP, I think, Mr. Zehan. By the way, if I pronounce your name like wrong, please tell me.
Coburg is the new media you have to follow.
Can you please respect the rules? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the floor. I'm Irish representative for EPP. Evening the uneven playing field, this wording is not accurate, I think, and as if it approached to the issue as a game that requires a fair competition, I think it's a kind of a bit bad framing. By harmonization, it is supposed to increase the standards of the member states who does not have regulations, but on the other hand, it will also decrease the standards of member states who already adopted stricter measures, like Ireland, which ultimately leads to less transparency. We would like to see a directive that ensures the transparency within the EU, of course, that does not undermine the member states who already have a working system. On that matter, we share the concerns of the NGOs. So we would like to highlight this question to Commission, why we should downgrade the provision of transparency for entities in and the citizens of the member state who already provide the demanded standards at the EU level. For instance, why Irish citizens and entities in Ireland should accept the lower standards. We would like to hear more on that. Thank you very much.
If the NGOs would like to answer.
Thank you very much for the question about the part regarding national authorities. So coming to the first question, yes, our organization, so Transparency International, would support an oversight of the authorities that would be at the EU level. Nevertheless, and here I answer to the second question, in order to stem problems, to stem problems yielding from the lack of perceived legitimacy that the EU is facing right now, is increasingly facing in terms of politicization, then we suggested these EU-level authorities would work in team with seconded national officials that would work together EU-wide. So there would be this legitimization from constituents at the national level, but at the same time, oversight would be ensured at the EU level. Thank you.
Other questions we had, Isior, I think. No, sorry. Patriots.
Hello, my name is Lana Kurtanidze. I'm representing the Czech Republic in the Patriots for Europe party. Although the unwillingness at this committee to create a true and needed debate is clear, this question needs to be heard. This question of mine to the Commission needs to be heard at the very first committee meeting on this proposal. The current proposal places all non-EU countries at the same level, which risks to alienate our diplomatic and strategic allies. My question to the Commission is, how does the Commission plan to address the potential diplomatic inconsistency and ensure that our relationships with these allies are not jeopardized?
Then again, like we mentioned, I'll give you like we mentioned several times already, questions for the Commission will be on Wednesday. Today is for the stakeholders, but I promise there will be a debate with the Commission. But I can see that you're already really enthusiastic about it, so that's good news. Then the floor to Mr. Meves.
Thank you very much, representing Romania SND. I would like to thank civil society organizations for joining us today. I know it's easy to jump to conclusions as to what the effects are of this directive, but I would like to focus in more on your personal experience of having guided and worked in civil society organizations. We were wondering from the legislative perspective, is it always clear to you in which countries you are performing interest representation, or the organizations you work with perform interest representation? Because we're working with, like, the proposal foresees national registers. So with the organizations you work with, is there a clear distinction between national interest representation in, let's say, Latvia or France, or can there be overlappings? Thank you. And if I may, a second question for Cecilia Longo. So you said we need to tackle malign actors within the EU as well. But really, is there any way to categorize clearly malign actors, whether foreign or internal? I'm just wondering whether you have a concrete proposal as to how to do this distinction, because as you know, it might create loopholes or it might stigmatize actors. So just if you have a concrete proposal, would be very glad. Thank you very much.
So yeah, the NGO will answer, and then we will do a last round of questions, and then we'll move on to the intervention of the rapporteur. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this question. I think that this is the right way to arrive to the conclusion of this meeting, because your question clearly shed light on the fact that the proposal itself does not work, because and that's the reason why we should be enlarging the scope of the proposal. So my main proposal was to enlarge the scope to all entities. That's the only way in which, because your first question, you were asking about if there's a distinction between, like, especially whether small civil society organizations, small entities really have a clear understanding, clear distinction of whether they're representing which interest of, like, the interest of the actors that are represented, whether like they are national or foreign actors. So, And instead, your second question was is there a way to avoid stigmatization if you're calling it the actors themselves malignant? Well, the only way in which we can avoid this kind of problems is to enlarge the scope to all entities, because otherwise we are at this stigmatization. Because I framed my organization framed the presentation quoting malignant actors just because the way in which the proposal is framed shed lights on the fact there might be malignant actors that seeks to influence the democratic exercise in a negative way. So it's the proposal itself that suggests this kind of this narrative. So the only way to avoid stigmatization, the only way to avoid a categorization that might be ineffective is to expand the scope to all. And that's my main proposal for the directive. Thank you.
And to the other questions, NGOs and CSOs, they have a scope of work, and they have, for example, their headquarters registered in a certain country. But what we care about is to, as I said before, to avoid duplication of registry efforts and all these questions and ambiguities that are being raised now with several national registers and the European level and all the national levels, because this is just adding to uncertainty, and yeah, this is what we're trying to avoid. So in the end, we see how all of this works from our perspective. All of the national or local, regional active NGOs and CSOs, they contribute to a democratic world in general, and this is why we don't think for our work it is not as important to really distinguish between country borders. But yeah, this is still like an important question to address.
Okay, so I will say last round of relevant question, only concerning hearing, yeah, ESN.
Good morning, dear colleagues. My name is Mao N. I am an MEP from Bulgaria, and I represent the Europe of Sovereign Nations Party. My question is addressed to the representative from Transparency International, Ms. Longo. I agree with you that the proposal is very much incomplete, despite its incredible length. I am worried about Article 2 and 3 in particular. While the definition of the activity of interest representation is defined quite broadly, Article 3, paragraph 2 is incredibly succinct. I will ask you, who is worse for the future of Europe? Interest representation by legitimate third countries or by foreign political parties and ideological lobbies, such as the LGBTQ lobby on Big Pharma, pushing onto our children dangerous ideas and products? What is your opinion on the issue?
Okay, so for ECR, Mr. Rubner, and then we'll have Kola, yes, for Socialist.
Thank you, ECR Latvia. I have a question for all present NGOs, as I have found them particularly evasive on their political stance. We have heard a lot about minority protection, representing interests of small groups, but I would like to remind them that about 10% of the population living in Latvia are illegally settled Russians by the communist Soviet Union, and that their groups are mostly founded by the criminal regime in Kremlin, and that they support overwhelmingly the Russian attack in Ukraine. I would like to know what they think about these kinds of groups, and what is in their interest, speaking about promoting groups that actually promote in the European Union anti-traditional European values.
Thank you. Last question for Mr. Richard for SND.
Thank you very much. Since we are with stakeholders, I'm surprised that no one mentioned the definition of lobbying activity, and I want to ask you directly, in your day-to-day activities, do you find any problem with this definition in the current directive? I think you mentioned that it was not detailed enough, but is there a problem for you that you can target in this directive. So what should the definition of a lobbying activity include to better define the scope of the directive? And a second very quick question, do you have any example of stigmatization that your NGOs that you represent face? Thank you.
Last round of answers for the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. I think the honorable members of the parliament, especially from the sovereigns from Europe, well, regarding your question, I would like to stress that again, these kind of problems will be solved adopting, enlarging the scope of the directive. Both of your questions could find an answer, could not be problematic if the scope of the directive could be enlarged. So I cannot but stress once again the need to include all kind of interest representation activities, because if you cover them all, then you ensure transparency from all, and should be less ideologically problematic for everybody. Thank you.
What about groups who don't share our values? I would like to expand the first question to maybe this point of view. It is very difficult to just homogenize a whole group of people, and if they do support democratic values the same that we all do, then it is important to support them, and it is important to not divide societies, but rather unite them to have a more stable democratic system. And the rest is like a question that is not concerning us, because we have our standpoints and we support the NGOs and CSOs that do valuable work that we consider as crucial for democracies. And yeah, there's always groups that don't share your view and your values, but this is another issue to tackle. An example of stigmatization, we can only imagine, but if we have to label and like be transparent. We are transparent about funding. All of our NGOs and CSOs we support are transparent about their funding. But then if it's been called lobbying on behalf of third countries, it can always happen that anti-American point of views are much more focused on NGOs and CSOs that get funding from American organizations. And this can hinder their work and put more obstacles to their work, despite their independence and their crucial work for European democracies. And concerning the definition of lobbying activities, we don't define this, you define this. We just do crucial work that we consider important, and then the interest representation activities is something that is an administrative issue. So we will do our work, whatever the definition is, but it is crucial to have a clear definition, as I mentioned before, in order to be able to know what are the demands and requirements and obligations that we have to fulfill to do an effective work, and to not encounter legal restrictions or any burdens or any fines or whatsoever. Thank you.
Ms. Longo has another answer, maybe.
If I may add on the definition of lobbying activity, well, we from Transparency International, actually, we do have an opinion regarding the definition. I'm just a bit confused about especially which definition you're referring to, because if you're referring to Article 2, there's not like lobbying, but I think that you're referring to interest representation activity. Okay, so in terms of that definition, we're not really concerned about the wording of that particular definition, but we are concerned about the fact that this definition does not cover, for example, like activities carried out on behalf of like public functions of third countries, or also ancillary activities or certain legal services, and that's both confusing but also unclear, because how can we define these particular activities that do not fall under this broad definition? Because per se, having a broad definition of interest representation activity is not a bad thing. it is confusing when we refer to interest representation services, which are defined as comma number 2, according to Article 57 of the Treaty of the Function of the European Union. That's another issue. But regarding to the definition, the only concerning thing is that it is very difficult to understand where we have to draw the line. That's the thing. Thank you.
Thank you. If you don't have any more elements of answers, we can move on to our next point in the agenda, which is the intervention of the rapporteur for EPP, Anna Eichenbaker. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by thanking all of the people involved in this subject. As you know, I've only been appointed rapporteur on this file a few days ago, and I'm slowly but surely finding my way through it. I want to thank also all the MEPs for asking questions to the NGOs. I think that is a very valuable input, and I think we can already start seeing the positions and what the individual groups are looking for in this file. It is quite a challenge to find one's way through this proposal. It is long, it is at times confusing, and some articles stretch over almost 2 pages, making it almost impossible to comprehend the purpose of it. And I'm asking myself if we as MEPs who are used to complicated texts are having difficulties making sense of this proposal, how can we expect European citizens to understand it? How is the EU supposed to be close and approachable if we cannot communicate our endeavors effectively? In aiming for clarity and conciseness, we set the scope for this directive and don't risk promising more than we can deliver. In an ideal world, the Commission would take this proposal back and would present us with a text that we can actually work with. A text that lets us understand the objectives of this proposal because it is so important. This topic is so important. It is more than relevant, which we have seen in my home country in Romania last year when the elections had to be canceled because of third country interference. But it must be possible to convey this in a manner that is understandable. It must be possible to read a text where I'm not tempted to look at my phone every 2 minutes because it's more exciting. And it must be possible to be able to expect this from the institution that holds itself to the highest standards. Despite all of these challenges, I can see us moving forward on this topic and with this proposal, as flawed as it might be. I have met with the different political groups over the weekend, and all of them have expressed strong support for this issue and aim at an ambitious outcome, even though we might actually be required to do the Commission's work and produce a directive that is concise, efficient, and effective. We can already sense where the political interests lie, who gets what from this, and it will be a great challenge to make sure everybody gets a piece of the cake. I want to express my gratitude to the organizations that came here today and who shared their standpoints and their recommendations with us. They are truly at the center point of this proposal and on the end of this directive, and their experiences are a crucial learning for us. And lastly, I want to call on all of my colleagues in this committee. Let us roll up our sleeves, find common ground, and get to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the rapporteur. We would like to give the chance to the Commission if she wants to react, but only on the rapporteur's stance of the proposal. No? Okay, no reaction. But of course, then again, I'll remember you that on Wednesday, we'll have the chance to debate with them and to ask any questions that the members of this committee want. So then I think we can wrap up today's sessions. So first of all, I'd like to thank the members of the Commission for coming and sharing their valuable insights, also the Council. I would like to thank the NGOs that came today and answered a lot of our questions, which I think is going to be really important for this committee and provide us with like clearer understanding of the directive and of your point of view. As for you colleagues, I'm really happy. I can see that the winter break was really restful and that you came back full of energy and enthusiasm. So that's good news for our discussions. So looking ahead, so we'll have the next meeting on Wednesday, the 15th of January. During this session, the rapporteur will present the reports. You will have the opportunity to provide with your comments, so shadows and other MEPs. You also have the famous debate with the Commission, which promises to be both engaging and informative. Also, in the interest of transparency, as mentioned in Rule 10 of Rules of Procedure, I want to remind you that you can already register all your meetings on the committee blog. We sent you an email this morning to remind you of this with the link. You also have the stakeholders' profiles, their emails. So please do so because it reflects the commitment of this committee and of its members and the compliance with the rule regarding the transparency. So that will be really important to do so. So we'll really we cannot wait to see who you're meeting and your so the stakeholders meetings. Then. Yes, we already had questions regarding the draft reports. So please be assured that it will be available to you. It will be made available to you on Wednesday morning so that you all have time to go through it. We know that it's short on schedules, but I mean, all the meetings are super short on schedule as well. So the rapporteur is already super busy, I promise. So please give her some time. And for those who are planning on proposing amendments, we're sure that there will be plenty of them. According to the Rule 187, then again of Rules of Procedures, we set the deadline on Friday at 10 a.m. So that we have time for us to go through all of them and to put them in the voting link and stuff. And hopefully it would allow us to avoid sleepless nights. But we mentioned it that it was one of the golden rules to be on time. And I mean, that's for us, but that's also for you, so that we all have them on time and go through and look at them. So yes, I think it's all for today. Thank you again for your contributions. That was really interesting for our first meeting. Looking forward to see you on Wednesday, and then the session is adjourned. Thank you so much.